All right. So we're going to talk about jurisdiction, the judicial process, and cyber procedure. And I don't think we really got to much of this last week, but we're going to start this today. So we're talking about the fact that in the United States, we have multiple court systems. We have the federal court system. Every state has their own state system. And then within those, there's some specialty courts. So part of knowing the law is knowing if you have a case in controversy, you have to know what court you're going to, and you have to know what system you're going to. And it can be very complicated depending on the situation. There's sometimes that more than one type of court could hear a case. There's sometimes it's very specific. So this is all part of what you need to know. So first of all, let's start with the federal court system, which is our national court system. And so with the national court system, that is established by Article 3 of the Constitution. Now, the thing about Article 3 of the Constitution is it says that we're going to have a Supreme Court. It doesn't say specifically how many people have to be on that court. Does anyone know how many people we have on that court now?
On the Supreme Court?
Mm-hmm.
Isn't it 8?
9.
9? Okay.
9 because they don't want to have ties. Doesn't have to be. It's been 7 in the past. A president could add seats. So that's not a fixed number by the Constitution. That's just by custom. It has been different at different times. So we have 9 people on the Supreme Court. Article 3 tells us that the president is going to nominate somebody for the Supreme Court, and that person has to be affirmed with the consent and advice of the Senate. So once someone is on the Supreme Court, they're there for life, basically until they die or retire. And the only way they can be removed really is if they do something illegal. Then they can go through an impeachment process too. So again, going back to what our founders were thinking at the beginning of this country, our founders were thinking it wasn't the national government that was going to be so strong and powerful. Our founders were thinking it's going to be the states that are going to have the majority of the power in this country. And they wanted it that way. So they thought that most things, the issues would come up, would be dealt with by state governments, not by the federal government. And so they really didn't think any further with the federal court system than the Supreme Court. Of course, you're sitting there, you've got 13 states, you've got a population of about 4 million people, and you've got very limited jurisdiction for what the federal courts can hear anyway. Did we go over the definition of jurisdiction last week? Did I give it to you? Or do you want me to do it again? Do it again. Okay. Jurisdiction is the authority of a court to hear a case. The authority of a court to hear a case. A court cannot hear a case unless it specifically has the jurisdiction to do so. So just because you may want to go to a particular court doesn't mean you can. The court wouldn't be allowed to hear it. The court is very limited that way. So our founders were thinking, well, there's not going to be a lot that's going to be dealt with by the federal government. Little did they know, right? How things would change. So what happened is as the country got bigger, as the population grew, and as the number of states were added, it was really beginning to choke the Supreme Court to have to hear all the federal cases. And so Congress was then able to add the lower courts. First, they actually added the local courts, or known as the district courts. And those would be the ones you'd find locally, like we have a district court here in Tallahassee. And then they eventually added the U.S. Courts of Appeals. And the country is divided into like 11 districts. Here in Florida and Georgia, I believe we are in the 11th district. We used to be in the 5th, but then they added another district. And so what this does is it takes the burden off the Supremes and starts the cases at a lower court to try to get things resolved much sooner. Questions on any of this so far? Okay. The state courts, oh my God. The state courts have kind of a similar system. Every state court has a state Supreme Court. Every state has local courts. In Florida, for example, they're divided by county. Georgia has 1 million counties, so I'm not quite sure if you do it that way. And then you have appeals courts. And you start generally at the lowest possible court. There's exceptions to that, but generally you're going to start at the lowest possible court. So some of the ways you determine what court you're going to go to, who has jurisdiction. First of all, state courts hear state issues. So examples of state issues would be like what? I think I'm talking too much. What do you think state issues would be?
You said state issues?
Yeah, when do you go to state courts? What kind of stuff goes to the state court?
I'm assuming stuff
When
like
it's just
tickets.
Yeah, your tickets.
Yeah.
What else? I know
Just
y'all
like
probably
misdemeanor
have most
charges.
experience with traffic courts.
Just like misdemeanor charge, like local charges that are not federal offenses.
Okay, so you think of state courts as lesser charges.
Well, I mean, yes, I do. I mean, but I mean, I know that if you go to like a federal court and it can't be decided, like the punishment can't be decided at the state court, then you have to go to a federal court.
Okay. I don't want you to be confused about the fact that states deal with lesser issues of lesser importance. Because
Oh, no. I just think that it's just like a misdemeanor, like just like a misdemeanor charge.
okay, and that's
And
what
like
I want-
traffic offenses and stuff like that. But like federal court is just doing like felonies and stuff like that.
well, that's a common misconception that people have, actually. So I wanna correct you on that. So state courts actually deal with misdemeanors and felonies because some of the most egregious crimes that we have actually are handled by the state courts. So
I
don't.
can't hear you.
I'm sorry.
Someone else's audio is on, and I am not hearing what you're saying. I'm sorry.
Okay, no, that's okay. I'll go back over what I said. If you guys have your audio on, if you're not talking to me, try to shut that off if there's any background noise. I thought I was hearing something too, but I thought it was. So it's not that federal courts hear the bigger stuff like the felonies. Many of the really big stuff actually is heard by the state courts. So some of our more egregious crimes and egregious issues actually are going to be handled at the state court. The state court handles the things that are really big, like when we think of things like murder and sexual assault, Alex, those go to the state courts, not the federal courts, even though those definitely are felonies. And there's a reason for that. Does anyone know what the reason for that is?
It'll be overwhelming, like it'd be like a lot. Oh, because it happens inside the states.
Right, because generally those are state crimes. There are state statutes that regulate and define crimes. So remember when we talked about the sources of laws, one of the sources of laws we said was statutes. And so if there's a state statute that defines crimes like murder, sexual assault, battery, things like that, then those kind of issues are going to go into the state court. So generally, if you commit murder, you're going to the state court. Does that make sense? Not the federal court. Now, there are times that you can be on a federal trial for murder, but those would be actually very rare exceptions. Does anybody know, for example, when that kind of thing happens?
Maybe if it's like someone who's committed crimes in multiple different places, multiple different states.
Could be, although sometimes they're generally tried in the different states.
Right.
Hate crimes.
Hate crimes are usually federal. You guys are too young to remember this, but in 1995, there was this guy who blew up a federal building in Oklahoma City. And a lot of people were killed. There was even like a little preschool in that building, and a lot of people were killed. His name was Timothy McVeigh. Timothy McVeigh was ultimately given the federal death penalty because it was a federal building that he blew up. So it was federal property. Does that make sense? If he had just randomly gone into Thomas University and randomly shot up the dorm, then that would have ended up in the Georgia courts. So those kind of things will end up in a state court, but it's not just crime. States deal with other things as well. What other kinds of things do you think states have to deal with? Because I know you read chapter 3. Or you pretended to read chapter 3.
I mean, do they deal with stuff with schools and policies and stuff like that? I don't know if that ever goes to the court. Like if they can't decide.
I didn't catch exactly what you
I
said.
said like policies and stuff for maybe like for an example for schools. I don't know if that stuff ever goes to the court, but if they can't decide, I don't know.
Well, what
I,
about? Go
I have
ahead.
I have a question. What about like divorces?
Yes,
Okay.
that's what I was thinking of. Family issues.
Okay.
Think about how many family issues end up in courts. Divorces, custody agreements, child abuse, neglect. That stuff all gets handled in the state court. So if you want to divorce your spouse, the federal government doesn't care about that. And there's a reason for that. Do you know what that reason is?
Because you got married in a state, obviously, but
Yeah.
maybe is that why?
Yeah, there's no federal marriage laws. Things that regulate family are generally regulated at the state level. That's one of the things that states do. So when you get married under state law. That's why you get a state marriage license. There's no national marriage license. So therefore, if you're going to get divorced, you got to get divorced in the state. If you're going to do custody agreements, custody is going to happen at the state level. So all of those things are going to happen there. Certainly your minor like traffic violations are generally going to happen at the state level. So most things actually are going to happen at the state level. Real estate disagreements, property disagreements, most of that's going to be at the state court. The federal court is only going to handle things that either deal with an issue of federal law or because there's a specific federal law that was been violated, or there's a constitutional issue in controversy. So make sure you understand that. If something starts in the state system, the only way it's ever going to go over to the federal system is if there's a constitutional issue in controversy. And some of those cases that we talked about, like the gay marriage case and Roe v. Wade and Bowers, those were state cases that ended up in the federal system only because they argued successfully that there was a constitutional issue in controversy there. So Yana, I know you're not from this country and this is all brand new. Are you getting this? If you're not, it's okay, because it's a lot.
Yes, I'm getting it.
Okay. And if not, you can watch this over and over and over again. So that's the only time it's going to jump. The types of things that would start out in federal court would be things like when you specifically have a federal law violated, like bank fraud, forgery, counterfeiting, things like that. Kidnapping, because why would kidnapping be federal?
The interstate commerce.
Right, because the roads are used for interstate commerce. I'm trying to think other things that would be federal. If there's a specific federal law that's been passed by Congress, like immigration laws, drug smuggling laws, that sort of thing. If you're violating that, then that would start out in the federal system. Okay, so generally you're going to start at the lowest court, and the lowest courts usually have what's known as general jurisdiction. General jurisdiction is a type of jurisdiction that means that the court can hear any kind of case. Any kind of case. That means the court can hear a civil case, or the court can hear a criminal case. So let's define what those are. You know what a criminal case is. A criminal case deals with crime. What's a civil case, do you think?
It deals with people. It deals with
people in business.
Well, yes, usually that is going to be right. People in business. When you're thinking about lawsuits and property rights, usually what civil cases typically are is private citizen versus private citizen. That's what a civil case is. I sue you, you sue me. So really anything that's not criminal ends up in civil court. If both of the parties are private citizens, that's a civil case. In a criminal case, only one party is a citizen, the other party is always the government. Did y'all know that? In a criminal case, one of the parties is always the government. So in a civil case, it's me versus you. A criminal case, it's the government versus you. That's how you know the difference. So if a court has general jurisdiction, they can hear either one. But sometimes states will have specific courts set up, like a juvenile court or a family court, just to relieve the pressure off of those general jurisdiction courts. It's not that those courts couldn't hear it, it's just that they're trying to spread the burden around, okay? So the courts that can only hear specific cases, like a juvenile court, that's called a court with special jurisdiction. And when would a juvenile court or children's court really come into play?
when they have those people involved.
Wait, say that again?
When they have them involved. When they have them involved.
Well, who would be involved?
The children or the criminal.
Well, it's usually going to be involved when there's a child's interest at stake. So it's not that the kid is suing somebody necessarily, but let's say we're dealing with a case where a child is being abused or a child is being neglected. Very often that goes specifically to a juvenile court. Or if a juvenile is being unruly, if we've got a 17-year-old or a 16-year-old who's constantly running havoc and violating curfew and their parents can't control them, that may end up in a juvenile court as well. And that's kind of a good thing, especially for criminal behaviors, because very often the records in a juvenile court are sealed once a kid reaches the age of majority. So that's the difference there.
Yeah,
So,
that's the way I'm going to answer.
you just didn't say it quite that way.
Yeah.
All right. So, so then we have what's known as subject matter jurisdiction. And subject matter jurisdiction means the court can hear a particular kind of case. So that's kind of like a special jurisdiction, but subject matter jurisdiction would be if a court is deemed to be only a civil trial court, then they can only hear those kind of cases. So let's say that you make a mistake and you bring your case to a court and they don't have subject matter jurisdiction. They're not supposed to hear your case. What do you think is going to happen? They're going to say, well, you're here already. Let's just go ahead and hear it.
I think they're going to guide you to the right case.
Right. They're going to dismiss it for lack of subject matter jurisdiction, and they're going to refer you to another court, and you're going to have to start the whole procedure over again. That's why you're going to hire a lawyer. That's why you're not going to do any of this for yourself, because your lawyer's not going to be stupid. Your lawyer is going to know which kind of case to file your lawsuits in or file your cases in. Now, let's say that it's not just you, but you're the owner of a company and you've incorporated. How do you know where the corporation is going to go to court? Let's say the corporation is the party named in the lawsuit. Then what happens? Have any of you taken like a corporations class yet? No? All right. So let me tell you this. So a corporation or a company has legal status of a person in the United States. Make sure you know that. A corporation or a company has the legal status of a person in the United States. It is created, like born. It can be killed, like disbanded. And it has all the rights and responsibilities of a human being. Strange, right? So how would you know, for example, which court a corporation might have to go to? Well, part of that would depend on where the corporation was formed, what state it was incorporated in, and where the company does business. Is this a lot this morning?
I have a question. So what about like Walmart? Like what if something is up with that?
So Walmart is out of Arkansas. And so you definitely could sue Walmart in Arkansas. But Walmart does business in every state in the United States. And I think because its presence is so heavy in every state, I believe you could sue Walmart in any state in the United States. I believe you absolutely could. But let's take a corporation like Publix, okay? So Publix is a Florida corporation. It's a huge corporation, but it's only in Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and like one or two other places. So let's say that you were a visitor coming down here from New York, and something happened to you in Publix. You could not sue Publix in the state of New York because they don't operate there. Even though you might be from New York, that wouldn't make any sense. But Walmart, I think, is so big, I think you could sue Walmart absolutely anywhere. And probably in some foreign countries too, to be honest. So remember, like we talked about the other day, that the court, in order to, it has to have subject matter jurisdiction, but the court also has to have what's known as personal jurisdiction, which means they have to have authority over the defendant. And so that really goes to what Jacob is asking, is like, where could you sue Walmart? Pretending Walmart, the corporation, is Walmart the person. Where could you sue Walmart? Well, I think because they operate everywhere so frequently, I think every state court has jurisdiction over Walmart. But let's say that we're talking about me suing Jacob. If I sue you, Jacob, where am I going to have to sue you? I'm going to sue you because you hit my car and I've got whiplash now.
In the state of Florida?
Right. You've got that big, beautiful Florida flag behind you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, in the state of Florida.
But let's say that I'm driving around Valdosta trying to head over to the Smoking Pig, Alex, because I like some barbecue. Sounds good, right? You thinking about that for lunch now? Alex, I can't hear you.
I'm in Albany right now.
You're in Albany today?
Yes, ma'am.
Well, Albany doesn't have the Smoking Pig, but let's pretend we're in your hometown of Valdosta and we're getting Smoking Pig, right? And in the parking lot, you hit me and you caused me to crush one of my discs in my back. Now, not only are you going to fail this class because I'm going to be irritated with you, but where am I going to sue you? I'm a Florida resident. I don't live in Georgia.
It'd be Florida, wouldn't it?
See, you would
Don't
think.
be Georgia.
No. It'd be in Valdosta because. But what? So what if
Not
I'm
the
like?
defendant, but the person that did it.
So what if I do? So I live in Valdosta now, but my address on my driver's license and stuff like that is in Thomasville.
Doesn't matter. It's Georgia.
Oh, okay.
The courts in Georgia and Thomasville and Valdosta really aren't going to be different. So what you could always do, let's say that you're living in Thomasville and I take it to the local court in Valdosta, you could always make a motion for a change of venue. But basically it's the same court. It's just going to a different branch, so it's no big deal. But I can't sue you here in Florida because Florida courts have no jurisdiction over you. You're not a Florida resident, and the incident didn't even happen here in Florida, so it's got to happen up there in Georgia. Even though it's more convenient for me to sue you here in Florida, I'm going to have to go do it up there, which means I got to go hire now a Georgia lawyer to do it for me. And so that's why some people are kind of deterred by it. But you can't just bring someone to court if the court has no jurisdiction over the defendant. That's one of the really critical things. So, if when they say it's hard to sue people out of state, that's the reason it's hard to sue people out of state, because the burden's got to be on the plaintiff. The plaintiff is the person who's bringing the case. The defendant already has the burden of defending themselves. We don't add to the defendant's burden in this country by making the defendant defend himself away from his home. Does that make sense?
So what if I am a Florida resident?
So if I'm a Florida resident and you're a Florida resident?
Yes, ma'am, but everything happens in Georgia. Like if I hit you in Georgia.
Mm-hmm. I think then we're going to have a choice. I think then actually I probably have a choice between the Florida court and the Georgia court. And sometimes that's known as when you can choose between courts and you try to pick the best one that's most favorable. There's a term in your text that's called forum shopping. And generally the courts will discourage forum shopping. But let's say that I know that the laws in Georgia are much stricter and I'm more likely to get pain and suffering and damages from the Georgia court. I may choose to go ahead and bring that in a Georgia court then, because that's where the accident happened. And then you may contest that. Hopefully your lawyer would be smart enough to say, look, we're both residents of Florida. This should be moved to the home state. Georgia has no authority over my defendant. And so hopefully it would get moved. That probably would end up being like that. You would probably try to get it moved that way. But in reality, you'd probably end up paying me more in Florida because Florida pays big pain and suffering to everybody. Everybody sues each other in Florida. That's half the fun. Half the fun of living here. Okay, so that's the personal jurisdiction. Let's see if we've gone through all those. Oh, then there's two more on the board that I have behind me that I wanted to go over. because why make this easy? So there's original jurisdiction. And original jurisdiction is the ability of a court to hear a case for the very first time. And generally, this is going to be at your lower court level. Toriano, were you asleep, honey? Okay. So generally, that's going to be at the lower court. Sometimes a higher court has original jurisdiction. Sometimes even the Supreme Court has original jurisdiction, and it's going to be for very specific reasons. Like, for example, if we're dealing with a case in controversy, and one of the parties, let's say, is a foreign ambassador, well, that's going to go right to the U.S. Supreme Court. We don't fool around at the lower courts. That would go right to the Supremes. And that's called original jurisdiction. So there is times when high courts can have original jurisdiction, but that generally starts at the lower court. And then the upper courts have what's known as appellate jurisdiction. And appellate jurisdiction is the ability to hear a case on review. And cases are not retried at the appellate courts. That's not what happens. So people always think that, if you've messed up at the lower court, you go up to the appellate court and you do it all over again. That's not how it works. Does anyone know what happens at the appellate court level? No one's ever been involved in a lawsuit or anything, or no? So what happens is the appellate court is usually made up of a panel of judges. You're not going to have a jury necessarily. Well, you're definitely not going to have a jury at the appellate court. Let me put it that way. Lower court, you may have a jury. Most likely you will. There's some things that are decided solely by a judge. But at the appellate court, you're definitely not going to have a jury. You're going to have a panel of judges, usually 3, sometimes more. And those judges are going to review the record of the lower court. So the lawyers aren't going to retry the case. They're not going to re-argue the cases. They're not going to be bringing in witnesses and all of that. They're going to be going over the record. And what they're looking for is to see if any mistakes were made at the lower court level. And if no mistakes were made, then they will uphold the decision of the lower court. If they feel that mistakes were made, they could do one of 2 things. They could either reverse the decision of the lower court, or they could send it back to the trial court for a new trial. Y'all writing this down? Because I swear there's a lot of questions on your test about this stuff. Questions, thoughts? Speak now, forever hold your peace.
Can you repeat that one more time?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
No, that's fine. It's a lot. That's why I'm kind of surprised everyone's so quiet, because it's like, are you really getting all this? All right, so the appellate court, they've got appellate jurisdiction. That means they're allowed to hear a case after it's been tried. They're going to look at the record. And if they see that there's been a mistake at the lower court, they can either reverse the decision of the lower courts, or they can send it back to the lower court for a retrial. But they're not going to hear the trial again. You're not going to be bringing in the witnesses and all that at the appellate court. Not going to be happening. So if you are the loser at the lower court, then you've got the right generally to one appeal. The loser is the one who brings the appeal. A winner never brings an appeal, right? Why? Why would the winner never appeal?
Because they already won the case. They want to try to keep it that way.
Exactly. I mean, yeah, you're happy, you're good, you want it over and done with, and let's go home. I won. The loser appeals because they don't like the result. And they say something went wrong here that ended up not in my favor. So the loser always appeals. I mean, the loser doesn't have to appeal. They can accept the judgment and walk away. But the appeal is always brought by a loser. Now, if you lose at the appeal court, you may be the loser from before, or you may be a new loser because things might have switched around. Then you can then appeal to have your case heard by either the state Supreme Court, if we're in the state system, or by the U.S. Supreme Court, if we're in the federal system. Generally, Supreme Courts of states will generally hear these cases. Usually they have to. State by state, it's different, but usually they have to hear the cases that come up from the appeals court. And that court is usually located in the capital of whatever state you're in. So our Supreme Court here in Florida is here in Tallahassee, and Georgia, you'd have it up in Atlanta. At the federal court, it's a little different. Sometimes if you are a loser at the U.S. District Courts of Appeals, you stay the loser. And that's because Congress has granted the United States Supreme Court something known as the writ of certiorari. And these are all, guys, these are all words from your textbook. I'm going to tell you, this is like the list of key terms from this textbook, from chapter 3. It's like 2 full columns on a whole page. That's how many vocabulary terms are coming out of chapter 3. So I'm only going over a handful of these today. The writ of certiorari is the ability of the Supreme Court to issue a writ that says literally, send the record up. Send the record up to us. We want to hear this case. They don't have to. If they choose not to hear the case, if they choose not to issue a writ, there's nothing in the world that can make the Supreme Court of the U.S. hear the case, and you're screwed. You're done. Fair enough? And if you don't like a decision that the Supreme Court of the United States makes, either to not hear your case or you don't like the way they've decided it, where do you appeal from there? Where do you think you appeal from there? Come on, y'all watched Law and Order enough to know this.
Could you repeat that one more time, please?
Yeah.
Yeah, Brian.
Thank you.
If you don't like the Supreme Court of the United States' decision to either not grant a writ of certiorari, or they've heard the case and they've decided against you, you're the loser, where do you appeal from there?
The media?
Huh?
The media?
Well, the media is nothing binding. I mean, where do you go and say, I don't like this decision? Help me.
To your lawyer?
The
No.
Court of Appeals?
No, it's a trick question. There's nowhere to go. God, I mean, I guess you could pray. That's it. You're done. There's nowhere to appeal the Supreme Court decision to. So if you lose or they don't want to hear your case, you're done. Go home, shut up. Nobody wants to hear from you now. That's life. Suck it up, Buttercup. And that's usually true at the state system too. Once you get to the state Supreme Court, let's say you lose, suck it up, Buttercup. You're not going anywhere. The only way you might have a shot at another court hearing your argument is if you can prove there's a constitutional issue in question. Otherwise, go home, shut up, you're done. Keep that in mind. At a certain point, you run out of paths to get your way.
So if you appeal, do you always go to a higher court?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, you're moving up the chain. You don't appeal to the same court because you're assuming the same court, well, because the court you were just in does not have appellate jurisdiction. The court you were in had the original jurisdiction. You have to go to a court that has appellate jurisdiction. Does that kind of make sense? That's why all these different kinds of jurisdiction are so confusing. All of this has to be met in order to know which court you're going to. And again, this is why you're not going to be your own lawyer. You're going to hire people to work for your business. You're going to hire a lawyer for your business. Because if you try to do this all yourself, you'll be spending all your time researching this. You'll never get out of just getting past jurisdiction. You won't know where to go to court. So it becomes a huge pain in the neck. You need somebody whose job it is to just figure this out for you full time. Otherwise, you're forever dealing with nonsense. Okay. I'm getting close to stopping for today because I know that was a lot of stuff. So one more time that a federal court also may hear something is if you have a similar case or the same case being decided in multiple states, like let's say a gay marriage case, and there's people suing in Florida for the right to marry, and people suing in Nebraska, and people suing in New York, and every state is coming up with different answers. And the Supreme Court of the United States thinks that, as they did, that there is a constitutional issue. Rather than letting every state have their own opinion on a constitutional issue, that's when sometimes they'll go ahead and take those cases. They're more likely to grant the writ of certiorari for them because they would prefer to have one uniform standard on interpreting the federal Constitution. They don't want individual states interpreting the federal Constitution. So those are the cases that usually get heard. Okay. Questions on any of this? I know it's a lot. By Thursday, you're going to be like, what the hell is she talking about? No questions? We're ready to take attendance? Okay.